everybody, and welcome to our continuing discussions on climate change and agriculture and energy. Let's talk about how we can reduce these things. What are some ways that we can lead the way and help the world reduce some of these carbon emissions?
Yes, we talked about this before, my brother and I, and we came up with a 6-point suggestion point plan that we could do in the U.S. and worldwide as far as greatly decarbonizing the emissions that we're doing here in the United States.
Point number 1, designing and retrofitting buildings so that they emit close to zero carbon emissions.
Okay, so the first one we were talking about is designing and retrofitting buildings so that they emit to close to net zero energy and emissions. We already kind of do this in some of the United States a bit, but this could be done on a
global.
A lot of people don't know about it, but if you take all the buildings, those are at least half or so of all the emissions.
Point number 2, do green manufacturing of cement, steel, ammonia, and aluminum.
Our second point, we think that if we did green manufacturing for a few chemicals, 4 of them we want to kind of talk about, that would significantly reduce worldwide emissions. And these chemicals and
so you're talking about green, this is the second one, green manufacturing.
Yeah, green manufacturing for certain chemicals and materials, which would include cement, steel, ammonia, and aluminum. So those 4, if we did more green manufacturing of those, I think that would that could reduce it by over 20% worldwide emissions.
Yeah. Point number 3, on-site power production for industrial or business.
Third one is to do on-site power for industrial, because that could really impact it a lot, because they use a lot of electricity. You don't have to, source in that electricity from power plants. They can improve their manufacturing, like with these things I was talking about, green manufacturing with on-site power. There's a lot of advantages to doing that. So on-site power, could be like using renewables like solar and wind and other types as well.
Point number 4, using biofuels to help with on-site power and vehicle transportation.
Fourth one has to do with using biofuels. So with this on-site power, it would be good that we could use certain biofuels, maybe also with hydrogen. For transportation, that would be really good as well, because you're achieving kind of more of a net zero status instead of emitting carbon, because you're recycling that carbon pool instead of just taking it from the ground. So biofuels, I think, would really help lower in the transportation area.
Point number 5. Promote power-related technologies such as nuclear and carbon capture and sequestration for fossil fuels.
The 5th one is to do certain types of power technologies, promote those, such as nuclear and then carbon capture and sequestration for the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
Because really, we can't just cut off our power from fossil fuels. I don't think that that's the best way to go. I know we've been doing better with coal, but if we did this carbon capture and sequestration, that could really help out. Or it'd be difficult to establish like a solar and wind infrastructure on such a high scale,
Point number 6, doing renewable and sustainable agricultural practices.
What's the?
The 6th one is doing sustainable and regenerative agriculture practices.
What are some of those things that are problem areas? Is it the fertilizer? What's the problem with the agriculture?
Yeah, I think
the cows.
It's both. It's the cows and the fertilizer, and they've kind of been making strides to try to do that, but they've been doing it too rapidly. Yeah. So those are kind of the good areas to do.
Capture of carbon dioxide has great potential uses in industry as well as hydrogen production.
Well, it also remind me of something. We don't have to talk about this very long, but we manufacture CO2, right now because they need it in certain industries. But there's a lot of CO2 out there, so we capture it. We may be able to replace some of that manufacturing with what we already capture, and that would be a good thing as well. Be more efficient. I was thinking about that in the greenhouse. I used to help run a greenhouse, and there's this constant you need CO2. And I was in charge of helping to set up the sensors so when the CO2 dropped down, we produce more CO2 in the greenhouse so that the plants, need to thrive, right? So what do? A lot of places, just because of the cheapest thing, is they'll burn natural gas or propane inside the greenhouse to produce more CO2. when we already got a whole bunch of CO2 that we could be using from other sources. And so if we carbon capture the CO2 from some of the other things we're talking about, like from coal or from other fuel plants and things for electricity, we could use that and pipe it in or ship it in and help maybe store it in containers to have that as a cheap source of CO2 so that people would use those more rather than making their own CO2 for whatever purpose.
That'd be good too, because I used to work for a biofuel company. We were a startup company. Our idea was to use algae to produce biofuel. And so one thing we were talking about is like, well, the day that they come out and they capture all this carbon dioxide from like power plants and they compress it into supercritical carbon dioxide, we could grow a lot of algae at that point. And so that would be really good. Having an algae-based industry would be really good, I think, for the world.
Yeah.
A lot of things we could do both with food and nutraceuticals and biofuels and animal feed, fertilizer. You could do all those things with algae. And so I really think that's, if we did carbon capture, that's a lot of that stuff could go there, That would be really good.
All right. And, we were talking about, as we produce more and more hydrogen for things, we talked about Caterpillar, that company before, but, and other maybe generators and generating power, we could use hydrogen to power some of these machines and generators and things. And that would be, a great way to start burning clean energy as well.
Yeah, it needs to start with those kind of companies doing those efforts, I think that would be really good.
In a future video, we are going to discuss each topic in our 6-point plan in more detail.
Yeah, so we talked about, these are things that we suggest, but I think, like you said, it's an effort that you need to start in industrialized countries doing in the areas of transportation and manufacturing industry. If you solve those two areas first and then look into buildings and stuff, they'll significantly reduce our carbon footprint and do decarbonization. And so in a future video, we may talk more about the 6-point plan in more detail about the decarbonization. We talked about it a bit, but we may get deeper into it and tell you more about it.
Yeah, so the top 3 out of the 6 would be good to concentrate on. So, yeah, about the power production and buildings and things. So, yeah, great. All right. Well, until next time, we're the Climate Change Brothers, and we're signing off.